Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and welcome. I'm talking astrology, and most specifically on this video, I'm going to be talking about the full moon in Aries on the 9th of October. But of course, I'm also going to be talking about the setting that full moon is in other words, all the other things, the alignments, the developments astrologically that are going on at the time. Before I begin, I want to mention that I'm recording this 2 days after Queen Elizabeth II died. So we're really in an aura, really, of sadness and loss, which is also very strange because at the same time, there is a new king and there is a certain sense of expectation and, of course, joy for him as well. So it's a very, very strange period and entirely fitting in a way of the time I'm recording this, which is a full moon in Pisces conjunct Neptune, which is at once about loss, about sadness and all those things, but it's also a very mystical kind of full moon, and I talked about that in the full moon of Pisces a couple of videos ago. So it is very fitting for this moment in time. A little bit later on, when I've gone through all the signs and looked at how the full moon is likely to affect you, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the astrology of the passing of the Queen, which brings up some very interesting considerations about astrology in general. But that's to come. For now, let me talk about this full moon. The full moon in Aries occurs at 20:56 UTC, which means you can stretch forward or backwards from that point, depending on the time zone you are in. This isn't a supermoon, by the way, but interestingly, it's going to look quite large as it comes over the horizon. And that's the point. That's why it's going to look so large. And depending where you are in the world, it might be a sort of interesting color as well. So the impact of this full moon in Aries is going to loom large because we will see it looming large. And as I said, the reason for that is that it's close to the horizon. Now, the full moon will happen at different times of the day according to where you are in the world. So this applies, the sense of the full moon, and you are seeing it coming over the horizon will vary from time to time, as we're going to see in the case of Vancouver, where I've set this full moon chart. You'll see straight away that the sun is right overhead. It's daytime, you know, so then you have to wait a few hours before the moon rises and the sun sets. Now, this particular full moon closes a 6-month cycle, and it was a cycle that began on the 1st of April this year with the new moon in Aries. Of course, this has great implications if you're in Aries, simply because a new moon in Aries, the sun is in your sign at the time. But of course, for all of us, the idea of a 6-month cycle is very much in play. What we began in April, we complete around the time of this full moon in Aries. Some of these things happen all by themselves. There's just a natural closure and completion. In other cases, it's something we consciously apply. And the cycle of the full moon itself, the 2 weeks following the full moon, before the new moon occurs, that 2-week period is a time of closure and completion where we can have an opportunity to tie things up, put them away, put them in the dustbin of history, or treasure them in our memory banks, whatever we want to do. But remember, that's still alive and well in the 2 weeks following our full moon. So I'll waste no more time. I will get to actually looking at how this full moon is in the horoscope. So as you'll see here, the sun is high overhead, perpendicular to the ascendant, and the moon is at the bottom of the chart. So if we look at our degree areas, we can see the sun at 1633 of Libra, and the moon at 1633 of Aries. And since this is set from the very far west of Canada in Vancouver, We'll see this is happening just around lunchtime. Now, what you may also notice as you look at this chart is how close Venus is to the Sun. There would have been a Sun-Venus conjunction about 3 days before, so we still have the effect of a Sun-Venus combination in the astrology. And the Sun and Venus are a beautiful combination. There is a degree of harmony and love and order and form and ritual. Libra is a great sign of ritual. And it's also a period, I think, where there's a seeking to find mediation, to find compromise, to get to the center path in order to unite. And all that, of course, is very, very Libran, but sort of boosted by the fact that Venus is also in Libra and close to the Sun. We can also see Mercury up there, 28 degrees of Virgo, and in fact, opposition, both Neptune and Jupiter. This has been in play for a little while. In fact, the whole span of Mercury's retrograde passage, which began on the 10th of September at the time of the full moon in Pisces, has been a 3-week period where Mercury has been broadly connected to Jupiter by opposition all through that time. Jupiter also retrograding, but also a little wider, but still Mercury in opposition to Neptune. And again, although there's quite a distance between Neptune and Jupiter, they are in a sense linked. And when we get Jupiter and Neptune together, we get a manifestation of all sorts of different kinds of things. Certainly, we get this high level of spirituality. We get this high level of sort of, I don't want to use the word vibration, but it is a high vibration. But we can also look at things like gas prices, because Neptune has a lot to do with gas. And close to Jupiter, we can see this idea of the inflation of gas and energy prices. That's something the symbolism of astrology tells us, because it speaks to us on so many levels. It speaks to us too of sadness and loss, the Mercury-Neptune opposition, but also always that calling or that need to get to that higher vibration, which gives us great insight, compassion, and all those other things redolent in a Neptune-Mercury influence. What is also happening around the time of this full moon on the 9th of October is that on the 8th of October, Pluto turns stationary direct. Now, there will be a few days in which this is manifesting, so we really need to go right back. We could almost go back right to the very beginning of October and see that all things Plutonic are on supercharge. They're uber strong. Pluto's principle of transformation, of endings and beginnings, of detoxification, of getting rid of things and creating space in order for new things to develop. Pluto is, of course, quite a disturbing influence in that it does take us to extremes. So we'll be living in a time of extremes during this the prequel to Pluto turning stationary direct, and also for another 8 to 9 to 10 days after that, which takes us right through to the 19th and 20th of October, when the Sun and Venus will also be squaring Pluto. So we could just say, in a nutshell, what is this period about? It's about transformation. It is possible for all of us to be changing at core level, and for us to be dealing with situations that enable that process to occur. But we can also look out on the world stage and see all the events that are happening that are really changing things radically for us. We are transforming as a people. We're transforming as nations. We are transforming as a planet. So it's a fairly intense, and I would say, thank goodness for Venus's presence in all of this, because otherwise it would be a very, very tough time for us all. The other thing that I'm looking at here is that on the 12th of October, Mars, which you can see just under the horizon at 22 Gemini, there in the kind of 3 o'clock position, Mars is going to be squaring Neptune, which we can see at the very base of our horoscope in the 6 o'clock position. So all up to the 12th, really. And remember, this is coinciding with a full moon, with Pluto stationary retrograde. We've still got our Neptunian influence with us. So there are a lot of things that we are grappling with in terms of reality. What is the reality? What's true? What is false? Do we feel uplifted by events, or do we feel betrayed by them? Do we feel we're getting the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Or is everything really very difficult to grip onto? There is a lot of uncertainty and anxiety in this picture, in this horoscope. And of course, you could say we've been living with that anxiety for a while. As I mentioned earlier, by the 19th and 20th, the Sun and Venus will be squaring Pluto at 26 of Capricorn. So if you've got anything around 26 degrees of the cardinal signs, then this is really going to trigger what that planet, that alignment means for you personally, but always looking at the idea of transformation, of things ending, of new things beginning, of things changing in our lives, where we can see we're never going to go back from that point. We're going to be going forward. And again, in line of the passing of Queen Elizabeth at 96 years of age, been on the throne for 70 years. This is a huge ending, not just for the United Kingdom and Great Britain, but for the world of which she has been or was such a part of. And out of that death comes the rebirth in the form of Prince Charles. So this period is going to be one where we can specifically look at the British monarchy and see that passage of time, that ending, beginning, death and rebirth taking place in our lives. And again, we can look at that, what's happening out in the world there, and thinking about what that means for us in what we are facing, that is stripping away what we used to know and used to think was our world, and now facing something very different. So let's come back to me and have a look now at what this full moon means sign by sign. And you know, we're all dealing with the idea of closure and completion at full moon. That's just its open and shut scene. But it will vary as to what area of life and all sorts of other things, I think, that play into that idea of what does an ending mean? Is it a great and glorious ending, one which we're thrilled with? Or is it something that's come to pass that we feel really, really sad about and really unhappy about? That's going to vary from person to person and sign to sign. But let's start with Aries, because of course the full moon is in your sign. So we're looking at the full moon in your first house. And if you've got Aries rising, yes, this full moon will be cutting across the first house and the seventh house. So it's the axis that's important. It's not just the full moon itself, it's the axis, first, seventh. But the emphasis of the full moon here means that the moon and its sense of empowerment, because the moon is in your sign, that's why you're empowered, Aries or Aries rising. And that means that a lot of things that have been brewing, maybe even things not just in the previous month since the last full moon, but the preceding 12 months even, a lot of things that have been happening are now being processed. And certainly if we look back at that 6-month period and the new moon in Aries, and we think 6 months along, you know, where are we? Can we see that we've gone through an entire period and it's done, it's dusted, and now we're closing things down? The idea of relationships flowing into this full moon also comes the idea that a relationship is part of our closure and completion process. It may be an anniversary for you. so that you are looking at your relationship, your mainstream relationship, and seeing it at the end of another cycle and the start of another year ahead for your marriage or for your partnership. We could be looking at it in the sense that you are ready to form a partnership. You're going to close and complete the deal. That's it. We are now going to unify, become a unit. So this can happen in business partnerships. It can happen if you join a company and you're going to sign a contract, or it can happen, of course, in the sense of love relationships, that we're ready to make our love affair legal. We're going to put it on a long-term footing. But so too is the opposite, as just as true, that we've completed the whole thing. It's come full circle. We're done. We're dusted. That relationship is at an end. That commitment is at an end. So it can be all sorts of other kinds of commitments that you have, including work commitments. We've got to put Pluto in the mix here, Aries, and we've got to see that it is time to throw away some things in life. We've got to say they're done. Even if it's, closing the deal and beginning a relationship on a new footing, we're still getting rid of a part of our past. We're bidding the past. And of course, during this full moon cycle, you may find that things come to an end. Things you didn't even expect would be ending. When we come to Libra, we're looking at the sun in your sign at the moment and the moon during the full moon in your 7th house. So this becomes an issue to do with partners and other people. With the sun in your sign, you're really beginning a new cycle yourself, and you're starting new things, you're being re-energized, you're the power behind your own throne, so to speak, so that you are putting things into being, you're initiating, you're feeling that you're out there starting this new cycle from your birthday onwards. So the full moon and its theme of closure and completion is definitely going to play into a relationship. It could be your most important relationship with your spouse or with your live-in partner. It could be your relationship with a company. It could be your relationship with a business partner, all sorts of things it may be. So again, it's the potential to sign on the dotted line and say, we're committed. This is a beginning. We've closed and completed our relationship, and we're starting a proper one. We've done we've done all the preparatory work, and now we're ready to go for it. But so too can it be an ending around this time. And look at the way Pluto will play into this. Stationary direct, so we've got a Pluto factor to consider here as well. So that this is a profound ending, a profound new beginning linked to the area of relationships. So we come to Cancer, and we're looking at the moon in the 10th house of the horoscope and the sun in the 4th house of the horoscope. And these two areas, of course, are linked. When I'm teaching astrology, I always talk about the 4th and 10th house in terms of this is where you began in the 4th house. This is your family, your background, your upbringing, and the influences that were around as you were growing up. You take out into the 10th house, into your world, and build your world out there, whether in the sense of a career or your material world, the things you want to really accomplish in life, your targets, your goals. So the fact that we've got the moon in the 10th house, we've got the sun in the 4th house, they're still in a way totally connected and interdependent upon each other. The 4th house, of course, is home and family, and the sun has been moving through this area since the 23rd of September, and it will continue to go on through there until about the 23rd of October. So we have a strong accent because the sun is moving through that area on things to do with the home and family. Are you perhaps engaged in a lot of activity on the home front? Maybe there's renovation and decoration going on, or even house moving. And if there's a house move, then this full moon is all about that. The sun opposition the moon, bringing an end to a chapter on home turf. But it can also be about family members moving on, moving into new places. So it's the end of a chapter marked by a family member. But because we're looking at the moon in this particular time frame, the 9th of October, we're also looking at events around this time, meaning that there's an end of a chapter in regard to your career or to something that you would consider to be an out in the world there activity. Is it the end of a job, retirement? Or is it perhaps the end of a phase of a job and you'll be looking at new subjects and new interests? Certainly this idea of endings and beginnings, closure and completion has something to do with your ambitions, your material world, and your career. There may be also too here the idea of balance, so that we need to find the balance between our world out there, what we're seeking to achieve, to be recognized for, to do in the world out there, and our home life, our home base, where we come home to be ourselves. So there does need to be balance here, and that full moon is revealing that time to find the balance. If we look at Capricorn, it's different. We've got the moon in the 4th house. We've got the sun in the 10th. So at the moment, right through until the 23rd of October, there is a strong focus on building your future. And that can have many manifestations. It can have to do with your career per se. It can have to do with the material world you live in. So you are building that, making it stronger, trying to cope with all the things that are happening within your material world. And of course, it may also be an important time to set out your market stall in terms of your career and to make connections with people who are central to you getting on in life. So the full moon here, with the moon in the 4th house, focusing on home and family, means that perhaps there is not necessarily a crisis in these next, in the time of the full moon and maybe those 2 weeks afterwards, that mean you really need to consider whether it is time to close a certain avenue of work, perhaps, or a time to put to bed certain activities related to your career, or whether, again, we're focused in the area of home and family, so that we're here saying, we've reached the end of a chapter, and it needs to be closed, in fact, with, well, maybe not with joy so much, but with a sense of accomplishment. I think that's really important. We have Pluto involved, so that means there are going to be some unknown factors that play into this sense of closure and completion aligned with the full moon on this axis, Capricorn. So now let's turn to Aquarius. Now, Aquarius, the full moon for you, the actual moon, falls in your 3rd house, the 3rd house of communications. The sun is in the 9th house, so we have a long extended period from the end of September through to the end of October, where things of a far off nature are really in focus generally. So it's a time of maybe planning long distance travel. It's a time perhaps of connecting with people who are far away, making arrangements perhaps for the future. Maybe a time of learning, experience, whether just by what happens in your life or by consciously starting a course. And of course, a lot of universities start their semesters at this time, so that might very well apply to you as you either go back to university or you are starting a university or some other kind of academic course at this time. So the sun's passage through this area in the 30 days that takes, all such things are going to be relevant. It's also a time, I think, when you look out your world and think about the trajectory of your life, where you want to be in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time. So a lot of the things that are coming up during this time are about long-term agendas. And if you can see what you're doing and engaged in right now are going to be of importance and significance, they're going to take you where you want to go. That's a good thing. But if, on the other hand, that's not the case, then things on steps need to be taken in order to set you on the right trajectory. And this is where that full moon comes in, that full moon that illuminates, but often in a way that illuminates things that you haven't seen before. So they're coming into consciousness, you're made aware of. So the full moon is at the time of reckonings, really, and in line with the idea of where you're headed in the future. This full moon could be enormously important, tied up as it is to Pluto. Is an event going to change your long-term horizons? And is it going to be around the time of the full moon? Maybe yes. But consciously to think about this at the time of the full moon, to reflect on where you're going, really. What is my long-term, where are my long-term horizons? And what do I need in place? And of course, because it's the full moon, it's about feelings. So feelings play into this, Aquarius. It's not just a mental thing, it's a feeling thing. So a lot of events, a lot of thinking, a lot of feeling, a lot of intuitions are going to point to that future direction in which you're headed in. It may also mean, because this is a kind of legal, contractual area of the horoscope, that there's a contract to sign around the time of the full moon, or one set to come in during the following 2 weeks. When we look at Leo, we've got the opposite going on. We've got the sun moving through the 3rd house at the moment, all the way through that 30 days. And we've got the moon in the 9th house. So looking at what the 3rd house is, it is also an area of communication, but it tends to be communications in the immediate world. In the 9th house, we're looking out on our bigger horizons. But in the 3rd house, we're looking at our, local horizons, if you like, or the things that are nearer in time to us and in space to us. So there may be a lot of communication going on, and so that there are people to talk to, there are business matters to sort out, there are legal matters, signatures to put on documents, all that kind of thing is going on. And maybe also a lot of, not gossip, but a lot of discussion going on between family, friends, and yourself. And it's in a way getting a kind of new look at where you are in life, your immediate horizons and what's going on in your immediate world. We put the full moon in there on the 9th, and we get this feeling that at this time, there is news, there is information reaching you that has long-term ramifications. The piece of news, what you've discovered, what you are learning, what you are experiencing is going to change your long-term horizons. You can see that. Now, it doesn't have to be just a fleeting, momentary kind of understanding. It can be much more than that. But even if it is just a thought, just a feeling, just a moment where you get a glimpse of something, that's important to build on, because you're seeing something, getting the information about something valuable for your long-term horizons. Yes, you may get to sign a contract at this time or sign something legal. That's all part and parcel of the closure and completion theme of a full moon. But remember, Pluto is in there too. So there's something hidden. There's something you won't be able to see that plays into all of that. If we come to Taurus, the full moon is in the 12th house. It's in your preceding sign, and the sun is in the 6th house. And this is a very interesting area of the horoscope because it has a lot to do with a sense of the service and where we give ourselves up to something. So in the 6th house, we involve ourselves, or we give of ourselves to others, and we give that in a sense of service. But in the 12th house, what we're doing here, I was going to say giving up the ghost, but not really, but we are yielding to something bigger than ourselves. We're letting go our structures and our belief system, all sorts of things in order to experience a much greater thing. So this full moon for you may be a very, very spiritual affair, Taurus. You may feel very plugged into what's going on at the time, or maybe even, in your own life, your immediate circle, you're much more receptive to other people's feelings. There may be a sense, because as you know, we've got Pluto tied into this full moon, that events are causing a great sense of personal transformation. You're seeing your world perhaps even in a new kind of light. And for you, of course, Pluto is in Capricorn, so it is in the 9th house, so it does tie in to the idea of your bigger world, your far horizons. The 6th house, of course, where the sun is and has been for a couple of weeks and will continue on there for another couple of weeks, means that a large focus should be on a sense of service to other people, what you can do for others. And perhaps some of that is in the form of duties and responsibilities. You may not like them very much, enjoy them, but it's good to do them because our sense of duty and responsibility is something that enriches other people. This is also what I call the health axis as well. So during the 4 weeks that the sun moves through here, it's time to put our health under the microscope and get fitter, stronger, healthier, go see our dentist, go get our health MOT, do things that are conducive to our overall health and well-being. And sometimes what happens with that full moon is that it really illuminates things that need working on. So we have a bit of a health issue or a dental issue, or maybe we just feel that we've worked too hard, we've overstretched our physical capacity, and we need to rest and relax. That full moon is a little bit of a red flag about our health. And I think it's a good practice to really prepare for the full moon and think, you know what, I'm going to take a couple of days not to do too much. I'm going to sleep and rest so that I'm going to give this full moon full value, and I'll get all sorts of benefits from taking that lower pace and allowing the information from the full moon, from the unconscious mind, to really reach me. Now for Scorpio, it's the reverse. You've got the sun moving through your 12th house at the moment, which is a very strange time. And when I think about what's going on at the time of this full moon, that Mars-Neptune square, which is extreme strangeness, it can give the feeling of being in a twilight world. So you've got a lot going on in your life anyway that's a little bit strange, or maybe a little bit out of your control. Or maybe you sort of have this feeling, you know, I'm being left out of the loop here. I just feel I'm not being told everything. I just get this feeling that, you know, I've been left out. Well, it can feel like that when the sun is moving through the 12th house, because you're kind of super sensitive to undercurrents. You're seeing nuances in things. You're not getting the full black and white picture. So it can be counterintuitive sometimes what you're thinking or what you're experiencing. But in fact, it's just that you're not picking up the strong signals, you're picking up the weak signals. So by and large, with the sun moving through your 12th house, this is a period when you should be resting a little bit more and taking time to think about your dreams and those proddings from the unconscious mind, because they can be so useful. And let's not forget, in another couple of weeks, there's going to be a solar eclipse in your sign, and a couple of weeks after that, a lunar eclipse. So these are really important points at which all sorts of things can come to pass, which change the status quo. So this is a preparation period for you generally, sun through the 12th house. But we come to that full moon. So the moon is in the 6th house. And we think about all those things I've mentioned, especially really with your opposite sign of Taurus, the idea that health and well-being come into the mix at the full moon time, you're suddenly aware of aches and pains you didn't have, of kind of things that suddenly come up, and you think, oh, what's that? What's that all about? And it is to alert your, or take, give your attention to those things that really require looking at. Take them to the professionals and find out what's going on and get them fixed. You don't want to be too stressed out at the full moon, because if you do too much, or you take too much upon your shoulders, too much worry, too much stress, the full moon occurs, especially as that full moon ties in with Pluto, and you'll be much less able to deal with whatever is around, much more likely to exaggerate the negatives and forget that the positives are in there. You might not even see them, but they're really there. I think, too, it may be a sense of what responsibilities you have on your shoulders, and they may feel particularly heavy at this time. And you know what? Maybe that's just a feeling. And as the days go by, you'll feel that burden lift. But I would say if you're starting to get anxious about money or how you're going to manage through the next few months, whatever else it may be, those thoughts are liable to be a little exaggerated, and a bit like having experiences at 3 o'clock in the morning and feeling terribly anxious about something. By the time you get up in the morning at 8 o'clock and the sun's out, you kind of wonder, why did I feel so anxious about that? And sometimes that's what a full moon is like. You'll feel super anxious, but it isn't real, okay? So now we come on to the mutable signs, and I'm going to start with with Virgo. And what we see here is the moon in the 8th house. And the sun, of course, was moving right now through your 2nd house. So there's a strong accent on money and self-worth. The two things often really interlinked. If we feel great about ourselves, we are very confident about our abilities and what we have to offer, it's easier to talk money, and we have a better attitude to money. The things really are interlinked. So it's quite difficult sometimes to know how to fix it. And when we get a full moon on this axis, the sun in your 2nd house, the moon in your 8th house, what we need to do is, if there is a sense of feeling as though things are not in balance in your life, somehow you're being dissed by other people, you're not getting full value for the things you're involved with or the people you're with, it's going to come back to you to really reboot your sense of self-worth. And that isn't just a matter of having a mantra that says, I'm worthy, I'm full of self-worth. You can't really do it that way. It comes from noting your achievements and what you really have achieved and can offer in the past. That's all part and parcel of who you are, and kind of realigning yourself with those values and valuables is a way of getting a kind of anchor, if you like, when things do seem to feel to be out of your control or not very comfortable to be experiencing. So the full moon, of course, only a day's event, but a 2-week cycle. When we think about that full moon in the 8th house, this is what I call house of receivership, which is why you get things like settlements in here. And we could even think of things like bankruptcies, but we think of inheritances, all sorts of other things that come to us, and the negotiation with other people in terms of money. We have relationships with banks and lending institutions and credit card companies. So this is the full moon accenting that. Means maybe we've come to the end of an agreement, or maybe we're about to reach a settlement, or maybe finances have got to a point where they need to be really balanced one way or another. And this area too, in the idea of what we receive from others and what we share with others, it has an aspect of it which is to do with intimacy. It's where we give ourselves to others and receive from others in that very intimate setting. So the full moon could bring a bit of a crisis in that area, either a sense of that you're not feeling related to, and there isn't a sense of great intimacy in your life or in your relationship, and that needs to be addressed. Or it could be that sort of sense of having really found that partner, that sense of intimacy with someone, so that you're really getting that over the moon, full moon feeling, in a sense of really experiencing that full sense of intimacy. If we come to the opposite sign, Pisces, and we're looking at the moon in the second house and the sun in the eighth house, so the things that I've just been talking about in the sense of an intimate relationship and your partnerships where you share financial responsibilities with other people, which can mean banks and lending institutions, every bit as much as if you're in a partnership, your partner's source of income, your income together with your partners, and how you divvy up, who pays for what. It's financial relationships, but it's also, sex and money. Aren't they so often involved? This idea of what you're getting from your relationship, what you're getting from your partner in the sense of true intimacy. So while the sun is moving through the eighth house, been moving through there for the last couple of weeks and is going on the next couple of weeks as well, it's a time to really put all sorts of financial and intimate relationships under the microscope and really look at what you've got and what needs to be done, how things need to be shared and divided up a little bit more between you and the people you share money with, or you share your intimate, that side of a relationship with. That's a longer process. At a full moon on the 9th, squaring Pluto, this kind of issue is going to come right up to the surface. So it's things about money. Now, perhaps you hadn't really noticed that there was an unpaid bill, or maybe there is some other factor playing into your financial picture that you didn't see coming, and that has to be addressed at full moon. But it could also mean that you're tying up a contract, especially with property, because in England, certainly, we have, when we're going through a house purchase, we have a final stage, which is called closure and completion. So a full moon can often indicate a closure and completion, particularly of a property deal, but it can be other kinds of deals. So, of course, a full moon has its plus sides. And with Pluto, you get the feeling that it's a large amount of money, or it's a big issue that you're closing and completing on. There are always, when you're looking at second, eighth axis, really, we like to say you should keep money and feelings separate. And you should, if you're looking at finances, you want to be unemotional about them. But, it's sometimes very difficult. They're a bit tied together. And especially at a full moon here, Pisces, it may be that you really do feel very emotional about a financial situation. Just tell yourself that. Tell yourself that you're perhaps not looking at it in the most material and unemotional way, and that it's probably much easier to manage than you think. But it's always good, full moons are a very good time to bring things to a head, after which they can be sorted. So final two signs, Gemini and Sagittarius. We're looking at Gemini. We're looking at this full moon in the 11th house, the sun in the 5th house. And this is a very, very creative axis. And I do often think of this full moon as the end of a gestation period. So something's been brewing for months, and now it's ready for delivery. So that has its most literal effect in the sense of pregnancy and birth, doesn't it? So you may be jumping up and down in front of your video screen right now saying, yes, I'm about to have a baby, which of course would be a very real manifestation of a full moon on the axis of gestation. But of course, lots of other things can take months and even longer sometimes to become complete. so that it can be a business enterprise, it can be some other kind of creative enterprise, and it's ready to be done. And you've got a finished offering here, whether that's exactly at the time of the full moon or whether it's shortly thereafter. That sense of closure and completion being a signal there for an enterprise or a creative project. Something that you've been working on is done. But of course, the full moon can be a bit of a crisis time. It can bring things to a crisis. So perhaps an enterprise or some kind of project that you're involved in with a lot of other people, it may be that it's hit a crisis point, whether that's just because people have different ideas and there's a sense of conflict, or whether it's financial and somehow this is going to impact on the enterprise itself. But of course, the full moon is a tipping point, after which the practicalities of that can be worked out. And sometimes what you get at the time of a full moon is exaggerated, and things can be made into a kind of more acceptable package as the days go by. If we look now at the opposite sign and we think about Sagittarius, well, you've got the full moon, the moon itself in the 11th house, and the sun in the 5th house. So for you too, this is the end of a gestation period. And whether you too can acknowledge this in the sense that there's a baby due, or a baby in the family, or or a baby who you're going to be really connected to in the future, that may be something you already know about. But of course, sometimes it can be something to do with your offspring. So that if you have children, then this full moon relates to them. So they have something happening in their lives that marks a bit of a landmark. And whether that's joyful or whether it's a bit concerning is going to vary from person to person. But the idea is, as always with full moons, and we see this in the new moon, full moon cycle, full moons end, new moons begin, and that's the life story. That's a cycle of life. So the idea that something has ended need not necessarily be a bad thing at all, because it sets the stage for a new beginning that will follow. Given that the sun is moving through the 11th house, there is quite a focus at this time, and will continue to be until later on in October, on the group ethos. Yes, we're all individuals and we have our own ideas about things and we feel things for ourselves. We are our own person, but we come together with other people, whether for the purpose of pleasure, social life, work, and also a sense of community and a sense of a bigger community in the sense of humanity in the world. So this is a time when all sorts of things may be occurring to you that you need to be getting a little bit more involved with things on a bigger level, a community level, perhaps on a group level, getting socially involved with things, or on that even bigger picture, humanitarian causes may be close to your heart. So we come to this full moon and we think about businesses as well, and things that are allied to the common good. So you may be involving yourself in a project that has to do with a common good, or it may be that in your own business or your own efforts, you're now starting to think, you know, what's missing from this is a sense that it works for the benefit of a whole lot of others. It isn't just about the product. It isn't just about the activity or the pursuit, whatever it is. It's about how does that help? How does that impact a bigger group, society, humanity as a whole? So we do get, again, the idea of a crisis here. Maybe it's the end of an enterprise or the end of a group event or work project. But it can also be the end of a romance as well. Remember, I talked about the new moon at the beginning of April, now this being the full moon, that we see that the life of a romance may be either at an end or ready to morph into something a lot more committed. So that's my run through all 12 signs. And you can see we play around with these themes of closure, completion, but also the idea with Pluto in our mix as well, then that has a lot to do with things we haven't seen, things that sort of come up at us and make a big impact on what that ending may be or what that sense of completion may be. So a little while ago, at the beginning of the video, I talked about that I was recording it just at the time, well, a couple of days after Her Majesty has died. So this is very much in our thinking, really. And what it made me think about, and what I've done, or will be doing a couple of videos about, is the idea of, you know, in a way, death always being a surprise. We never really expect it. I mean, even if we know, I mean, we all knew that the Queen wasn't going to live forever, no matter how much we wanted her to live forever. But we could see her diminishing in front of our very eyes, so to speak. And if you looked at the astrology, which of course is what I had been doing since the October of last year, it was fairly obvious that there wasn't going to be much more than perhaps a year to 18 months of this reign to go. And so there was a certain sense of looking at the signals, the symbols, the symbolism of what we were going into. And the eclipses were a very powerful part of that narrative. And we got the first really important eclipse in the November of last year, 2021, which connected with the Queen's chart and the rest of the leading senior members of the royal family's charts. We got the same thing happening again in May. So these things were extremely significant. You knew there had to be a really important event happening to the family. What added into that then was Saturn coming into Aquarius, Uranus in Taurus, and those two things connecting with the eclipse patterns that also made this a period that was going to be very tumultuous in some way. And if we just look at the general period from the October of last year to where we are now, we think about the huge things that have happened to the world, whether it's the war in Ukraine, the fuel crisis, gas prices, cost of living, inflation, and then we tie in the death of a monarch who's been on the throne for 70 years. Then we could see just how these very important planetary alignments came together to produce the things that have happened. But what I want to say here is that even if you could see this was going to be a time of turmoil for the planet, you couldn't necessarily see the exact detail of that. And more to the point, when it's something concerning, in this case, you know, the death of a monarch, a lot of things have to come into play, because it's not just the death of the monarch, it's the birth of the new monarch. So a lot of things symbolically have to be taken into that. And sometimes you need to get the exact moment to sort of see that really unfold. And again, I don't really want to make this about the death of the Queen and the new king coming. It's not just about that. My point really is about what we use astrology for. And I think it's really important to understand that astrology is a beautiful lens through which to see life, you know, moving. It's, as I say, the planets are the narrative of our lives. We can see that playing out. But we also are part of the story, in as much as here we are on planet Earth. We're part of the solar system. We're also going around the sun with our moon. We're an integral part of our solar system. So we're an integral part of the narrative that we see in astrology. And so we play into that. And our actions also subtly flavor and even alter the dialogue. I think that's so important to know. Let me give you another example of this. And we go back to 9/11. During that year, the Saturn-Pluto opposition was forming, and we all knew, because just like the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which happened prior to COVID-19 and everything else that happened after that, we all knew that on Saturn-Pluto opposition, there were going to be some Earth movements in terms of global events. And I was trying to narrow it down at the time, and I thought, well, August the 5th was the most likely time for an event of huge importance. It was the exact Saturn-Pluto opposition. But then I also looked at the pattern of the other planets and the full moons and all those other things that would come into play to get another kind of view. And it took me right through, I think, to about the first 10 days of September, where I thought that was the margin in which we would get this huge event of global importance, which of course it was. But when I looked back, we had the event, and so we could see that, and the story of 9/11 played out through the astrology is extraordinary. But when I look back to August the 5th, which was the pinpoint date, that turned out to be a date of huge importance, because that was the date that message landed on a government desk saying Bin Laden to strike US citizens. But somehow it wasn't acted upon. Now, just imagine if someone had looked at that memo, or memo, some people say, and thought, you know what, we better start taking this seriously. Could 9/11 not have happened? I'm just throwing it out there. But life astrology needs to be looked at in the context of fate and destiny, but crucially important, our involvement with the story of mankind and the shaping of our destiny. So I think that wraps it up for this video, and thank you for watching. And as always, please share the video, or please subscribe, because it all helps towards the understanding and growth of good astrology. Thank you. Bye-bye.